Can we not have a serious conversation? I doubt it. Why don't you want to have a serious conversation? I don't know. I feel it's obligatory to review the last episode in careful detail, but it's not my mood. The last episode. It was clearer in part, but it's a complex argument. There are things I would say differently even now. Okay. Let's let it lie for the moment. Anyway, the questions are on your end. Go ahead, ask me whatever you want. I can't think of anything to ask. Okay. I'll tell you something then. A name. Ever since the first episode, this name has been in my head, but I haven't said it. Is it David Gilmour? No, I've said that name. Go on. Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall. Chimpanzees? I saw her memorably in interview once say that she never contributed anything to science that every pet owner didn't already know. That's funny. She's like, to me, an intellectual hero, I think, and for that reason, I don't think her admission was self-deprecating. I think it was more about what she was up against. Up against in claiming that what was to her, and probably to many others, obvious from a common sense standpoint, shouldn't be barred from formal credibility. It was also science. That animals had personalities, you mean? Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. Thinking about it. Numbers. Numbering the animals. That was the practice, right? Would seem more quantifying, more precise, more manageable. Superficially, more scientific than, well, the inscrutable complexity of an abstract idea like personality. I agree. The unfortunate imprecision of the way things really are. If I recall, in a previous episode you had a line about common sense and academic rigor not being on speaking terms. This conversation reminds me of that. Yeah, exactly. And a joke in the same episode, experience minus common sense equals academic rigor. It was something like that. It's interesting to me, to think about how the range of topics permitted for, say, a dissertation may have expanded over the last half century. A dissertation on the local history of hip-hop culture or an investigation into lived experience of some kind. I don't know. There seems to have been a slow breakdown of mostly unjustifiable biases, and not only the well-known, frequently discussed biases, race and gender and so forth, but more subtle barriers forbidding perhaps the personal, in preference for a more detached, personal pronoun excluding tone. There's been a slow breaching of the dam, and a steady inclusion of not just a broader range of topics, but possibly a broader means of knowing. What I'm trying to say is this. One way in which our formally accepted body of knowledge advances is simply by no longer excluding from it what we already know. Okay. And this relates to music? I think so. Sometimes I think that the sorts of arguments I'm trying to make are really rather absurd, obvious to the point of silly. Of course there's a human composer behind a symphonic work. Is this controversial? Who would contest it? Of course we're meant to listen to music as it, quote, seems to be, rather than, arriving in our seats with oscilloscopes and trying to take scientific measurements. Who exactly is requesting we do such things? Who's handing out the oscilloscopes at the door? Right. So then, what's the problem? Well, the problem is, I guess, the one I'm discussing, the problem of formal acceptance, if you like, of what's permitted to be reality proper. I feel we're not so much doing double entry accounting, checking our academic conclusions against our common sense is living uncomfortably with two sets of books. We're not being honest with ourselves. Informally, we live here, in the world of common sense, I guess. When we go to the symphony, we accept that our impressions, what comes to us in direct experience, is what music is and is what the composer intends we feel and experience. It's an informal conclusion, informally drawn from an informal scene, and we can't do without it. And formally? Formally? I guess what comes to mind for me, especially when I think of academic formality and reality proper, is acoustics, the branch of physics that studies sound, or the more objective aspects of music theory, pitch distance, and so forth. Formally defined, music is something entirely different from what it seems to be in ordinary experience. Formally, it's, something else. Something objectively described in perhaps even scientific terms. But that's what music, we're told, really is. Did you know that objectivity, scientific objectivity, is sometimes described as the view from nowhere? Formally, academically, scientifically at least, we are making an explicit aim of excluding first-person experience. Yet what kind of sense can we make of something like music with this being our first commitment? An assumption we commit to whenever we get importantly serious about understanding anything. I like informality, I think. It's a check against not only our body of formal knowledge, but the pretensions that safeguard it. Well, neuroscience arguably includes first-person experience, and from a scientific vantage. Maybe. We've talked about that. It certainly includes the physical facts of our first-person experience. But it's unclear that it doesn't include these facts with the aim of vindicating, of advancing the idea that the subjective ultimately is the objective. Put simply, that experience really is only the physical brain. Okay. Let me summarize. One of the takeaways from this season, an undercurrent you're trying to surface and make explicit, is that what we already know informally, what is common sense obvious to us, let's say, is also defensibly true, is valid, whether as yet it's deemed permissibly academic or not. I think so. It may be that it's appropriate that first-person experience is excluded from a scientific description of music, that this is simply an uncontroversial consequence of science intentionally limiting itself to describing the physical world. Yet, even if first-person experience is rightly excluded from science, it can't be lightly exiled from reality. Again, it's the unfortunate imprecision of the way things really are, or at least seem to be. In any case, music obviously includes our subjective experience of it. Therefore, any serious attempt to understand music comprehensively, and a serious attempt is what I presume an academic attempt ought to be, must include, not cleverly exclude, our first-person knowledge of it. We should be grateful, of course, for scientific objectivity, what it's achieved in one domain, for the work done in neuroscience, but we should also be a little wary, I think, careful when someone claims that when we listen to music, what is, quote, really happening is, and then goes on to describe only the physical phenomenon. That all too common approach surely tacitly asserts that scientific objectivity presents the complete picture of reality proper. That's what really means. But is it safe to imply I am not really experiencing? Such an approach, to me at least, risks excluding music altogether. If, as we've argued in the past, music is what it seems to be in and to someone, that is, in experience. You're repeating yourself. Well, to repeat myself again, and hopefully not too often. The salient question I really think is, would music be music in an unpopulated universe if heard by no one? Subjective reception of it seems intimately definitive of it and necessary to it. Music includes, of course, the exterior sound source, but can't exclude the conscious subject. Brahms' out of mind is inconceivably different to the point of absent, or present, but to no one. Can this be music in the same sense? And frankly, ownership of the term music, its application exclusively to effects consciously experienced, is not the aim. Really, it isn't all that important to me. But distinguishing what music is in conscious experience from what it might be out of conscious experience seems vital. Those are not the same. And although I've argued, or at least suggested, that consciousness is real, I've also argued with myself about whether such a claim is even necessary to the larger argument, at least to the larger argument I'm making in this conversation. I suspect my point here holds regardless of what view we take of consciousness. Real? Illusory? Property dualism? Functionalism? Emergent property? Etc., etc. Nothing needs to be settled in any final sense to support the simple assertion that what music seems to be in our conscious experience, whatever consciousness might debatably be, differs absolutely from any exclusively physical description of it. Okay. Look, I see it like this. In one sense, you're arguing against physicalism as a comprehensive description of reality. But you're also questioning whether proving consciousness to be real, and therefore one possible counterexample to physicalism, is even necessary. It's true, I think, that in either case, there is undeniably a way music seems to be to us and in us, and that this way things seem to be, officiously real or not, can't be excluded from any comprehensive description of music. It just can't be withheld from, say, a field like music theory. That point carries. Scientific objectivity, if only a physical description, can't tell us what it is like to hear an A major 7, or anything else. That won't do. If science isn't an incomplete description of reality, yet it's at least a dramatically incomplete description of the way we relate to and make and appreciate music. And I agree with you about Jane Goodall. I mean, we do know and probably agree that academic and scientific rigor, in so many cases, should check our common sense assumptions. But I think it's right to point out that our common sense sometimes must also be allowed through, must overcome our academic pretensions, really. That we might find subjective experience academically undesirable for being qualitative rather than quantifiable, private rather than public, or personal rather than, physical. Or a source of rich meaning, but, in the case of music, meaning often resistant to definite language. Whatever superficially unscientific properties it may seem to have, these we can say at minimum can't constitute valid grounds for excluding experience from theory, where it's most obviously relevant, where in fact it's indispensably necessary. These are simply the real difficulties we encounter when we deal honestly with the situation as it is. Let it through. Agreed, let it through. And a final point. Let it through not only as a source of inquiry demanding objective answers. Let it through as a source of knowledge, of information, explaining our objective decisions. What do you mean by that? I mean, sure, we can ask why a particular bar of music is beautiful and then defect to all kinds of objective explaining this scale, that mode, the other interval. But think it out in reverse. We might equally ask, why this set of objective decisions? Why push this key, then that one, then the other? Then why the others pushed all at once, but with a tentative touch? Because it was beautiful.